Welcome, everyone. This is it's a very exciting day for the city of Harrisburg. Today, we are announcing our Vision Zero Action Plan, which is a nearly 40-page document that took an awful lot of work from many different individuals. It is a fundamental commitment to safety for all of our street users, whether you walk or ride a bike or take a bus or drive in the city of Harrisburg. And it really is a transformative document, and we're going to walk you through that here today. I wanted to begin by thanking some of our partners. You see many of the members of the task force and project team here this morning. There are others who couldn't be here. This was truly a collaborative effort. Of course, the city, police, fire, engineering, all of our departments participated, but we were lucky to have partners such as Capital Area Transit, the Harrisburg School District, the PA Department of Health, PennDOT, and Tri-County Regional Planning. Those were some of the major stakeholders. I should also mention AARP, which was extremely helpful. And a special shout out to community member Lisa Jenkins, who was at all of our meetings. I don't see her here this morning, but she was one of the very first people to knock on my door and come into the mayor's office and want to talk about her experiences and experiences of family members and neighbors, specifically with regard to State Street. I also want to thank Wallace Montgomery. They've done a tremendous job helping guide us through this process, and we've been really lucky to be able to bring them on board. We want to start with our first slide, which is, we're going to show you some slides of the actual action plan. There should be copies for each of you, bound and reviewable. And I'm going to highlight a handful of slides, and Wayne's going to highlight a handful of slides, and then you can read the document for yourselves. But we want to begin, as we've begun all of our meetings, reminding us why we're here. And we're here in part because about a year ago, in March of 2018, 62-year-old Cynthia Wilson was crossing State Street and was killed while simply trying to shop for herself and her family. At that time, that was the fifth pedestrian death that had occurred on that section of State Street in a 17-month period. It garnered significant attention as one of the least safe streets anywhere in the country. And it was not only Cynthia, it was others, including a young man, a 27-year-old named Donald Welsh. This is a personal story for me. Donald worked at the Midtown Scholar and was a great young man, a hard worker, didn't have enough money to be able to afford a car. And his colleagues and I had all pitched in to buy him his bicycle, which he was very proud of and which he used as his primary means of transportation to and from our warehouse. And it was on that bicycle that he was hit and killed. Donald, Cynthia, the others. In fact, there have been 19 traffic-related fatalities in Harrisburg and over 105 severe injuries just in the past 5 years alone. And if you'd like to see how these are mapped and plotted, go to our website, our Vision Zero website, and check out the High Injury Network, and you will begin to see what a significant problem that we have. These deaths, our commitment to public safety, were a call to action, a significant call to action for the city. And what we are trying to do is to fundamentally reverse what has been historically an auto-centered transportation system for the city of Harrisburg. And I should note that the increasing number of traffic fatalities in Harrisburg mirrors a larger national trend. It's not just in Harrisburg. And other cities, we're now the third city in the Commonwealth to adopt a Vision Zero plan. And cities throughout the nation, indeed the world, are trying to grapple with what we can do to make our streets safer. I'll take you to another slide, which is what is Vision Zero. And it is fundamentally a commitment to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries over the next decade. That's our plan, and it is doable. there's a little graph on that page which I think is illuminating. It basically talks about traditional approaches to this issue, which sees traffic fatalities as inevitable. It's really usually an individual's responsibility or fault, and you can't really do much about it. So goes the traditional narrative, because all these changes are very, very expensive. And what Vision Zero is saying is that it's not inevitable. There's a lot you can do about it. It's not just an individual's responsibility. It takes all of us systemically to plan for these changes in ways that make an impact. And importantly, it doesn't have to be expensive. And there are ways that you can pilot and test and design rapid responses that don't have to break your bank account. And these are some of the things that we are taking into account right now in the city of Harrisburg. So what are the core elements of a Vision Zero plan? Well, a Vision Zero plan like we've developed here requires fundamentally a commitment to public engagement, as well as a commitment of all the individuals that you see here to see change and to see it through. It insists upon a strategic planning design which requires sort of clear goals, measurable results and outcomes, and you will also find that in our plan. It's about a philosophy which is looking for complete streets and creating a grid, an interlocking grid throughout the city where people can travel safely from one destination to another, and doesn't forget any particular user, whether it's a bicyclist, a walker, or somebody who takes the bus, with a special emphasis on data and on equity. We need to also remember that we are focused on serving everyone in the community, including many of those in traditionally underserved communities. And when you look at a project like our State Street Rapid Response, we can talk more about why that is so important. I talked about the high injury network. This is the fundamental data which is going to be driving our response. And it's important to recognize that everything that you're going to read and see in the plan that we have before you today it's not a static one-time thing. It's going to be a constant series of evaluations and adjustments and understandings as we move forward to try and make Harrisburg safer over the next decade. Sometimes those core elements can be neatly classified into what Wayne will call the 7 E's, and we'll walk you through everything from education and evaluation to engineering. But those are really the fundamental core elements. And what are the goals? Well, the Vision Zero goals, as you will read and you will see, are really very simple and easy to understand. Number one goal, save lives. That's what it's all about. Save lives and make Harrisburg safer. Number two, develop a system which is going to protect the most vulnerable users of that system. And number three, it's important to realize that we are fundamentally all about improving health. There are things that we can do here, from improving air quality to encouraging exercise and alternative means of transportation to, believe it or not, yes, reducing congestion. You can have slower speeds and safer streets and less congested ones as well if you plan. And those are the goals of Vision Zero. There's interesting data throughout this whole action plan, including the graphs on that page, which you can delve into and look at. I want to turn things over now to Wayne Martin, who, as our city engineer, basically has chaired every one of these meetings that developed the action plan that we're here today. And he's going to walk you through some of the very specific goals in each of the sections. And then I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about one of our signature plans, the State Street Rapid Response Project. But Wayne, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'd like to start with the action plan itself. Thank you, moment. The mayor had mentioned the data-driven part. I think that's very important to understand that we don't have unlimited resources. So what we want to do is we want to concentrate on that high injury network. We're going to take what is referred to in the action plan as a strike team approach. Traditionally, the city government and perhaps other city governments had worked in silos, right? So the police enforcement, when it happened, where it happened, was solely up to the police and their team. What the engineer did, same thing, was very siloed. The school district's missions, things like that. So what we've done is we've created this task force so that we have all the resources and force that collaboration. And some of it has come natural once we got all the parties together. And some of it, we have to sort of emphasize and encourage. And so you'll see some specific examples of that in the action plan where that collaboration is required. We go to evaluation. Yep. Okay, so we'll talk about those 7 E's, which the mayor mentioned earlier. Evaluate. Okay, so the high injury network was the first step in that evaluation. We're going to continue to evaluate city streets and city corridors. There are specific action items under the evaluation tab that I will highlight. The next E, engineering. Okay, that'd be my bread and butter. So there's specific action items, again, under engineering. Some of our streets, the mayor mentioned, need redesigned or rebalanced, perhaps is a better word. Forester Street comes to mind, seven vehicle lanes and sidewalks with utility poles that cannot accommodate a person walking, let alone a pedestrian in a wheelchair. So rebalancing is maybe a better term. Educate, another E, educate. We have to start with the kids. We have to start with our children and let them know this is how you negotiate a street. Perhaps that car should have yielded to you, but you can't take that risk, right? Engagement. So these education and engagement, I think, go hand in hand. And the police are prepared, and there's some specific action items for them to help with that education. We have the community, our communications team on board with this. We have all you folks here on board with this. Also, the school district has been an active participant in our task force. Enforcement. Unfortunately, there have to be consequences to violating the traffic laws, and so enforcement is a big part. The executive and the equity, and keep in mind that all of these E's had separate subcommittees that came up with these action items. Among the task force, we divided ourselves into subcommittees to create this list of year 1 action items. And so executive and equity, the mayor had already mentioned equity. We have to make sure all the other E's are equitable in implementation. And there's also that executive to make sure we force that collaboration where maybe it's perhaps not natural to have these separate departments, separate entities collaborate. But also, that's where we have some things in there where we're focused on perhaps influence state legislatures for law changes. Keep in mind, a perfect example would be yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk. Front Street comes to mind every time I drive down Front Street. The law is that pedestrian has to step out into that crosswalk in order to force that car to yield. Is that right? Is that a good law? And then the drivers complaining, well, they stepped out in front of me. Well, they under the law, they have no choice. That creates that obligation for you to yield. There's other ones. Park and protected bike lanes are actually prohibited under state law because of an antiquated law that requires a parked vehicle to be 12 inches from a curb. And there are certainly others. PennDOT funding mechanisms do not allow for sidewalks, at least through like state liquid fuels and things like that. So if you want to do a sidewalk improvement project, perhaps on Forester Street, you cannot utilize those state funds, which are readily available to cities and local governments. So there are others, and we're going to continue to look at those. And I'll get into a little bit more of that when we get into the some specific action items. So evaluation, there's 2 I want to point out, and if you have your action plan handy, we can go through them. I know this is a little bit difficult to read. 1.3 I wanted to highlight. This is a developed neighborhood slow zone program. So we have a petition that's traditionally used in the city, and residents will petition for a traffic study. And unfortunately, what it does is it asks that those petitioners to petition for a very specific solution to a problem. So if they have speeding or their concerns, or maybe their rear view mirrors get knocked off by vehicles or something, so they'll actually suggest eliminate parking on left side of road, or install stop sign at intersection of X and Y. And unfortunately, we do our studies, which are warranted by law, like an installation of a traffic study is a guideline we have to follow through PennDOT, and find, I'm sorry, the stop sign is not warranted. And so we can't install the stop sign. And that's sort of where the matter unfortunately ends. A more proactive and probably more beneficial, well, definitely more beneficial approach for the community would be a neighborhood slow zone program, and these have been successful in other communities, whereby we have criteria on perhaps ranking neighborhoods, and that petition would be to create a neighborhood slow zone. And then we can look at the whole gamut of opportunities and options available, to create slow zones. So traffic calming measures and education, and more of a strike team approach rather than just a denial of a petition. Again, this will still be data driven. So if we decide maybe we could create one neighborhood slow zone a year, and that's what our budget allows, there may be 6 competing communities, and we have to go through the data-driven approach. We have to go through, our equity evaluation and determine, which neighborhood, which petition, rises to the top and deserves to have that first neighborhood slow zone implemented. 1.9 is the other one I wanted to point out. Special events plan to encourage bicycle and pedestrian use. So this is sort of a two-prong approach here. One is we do have a lot of events in the city of Harrisburg, Capona Fest and Arts Fest and parades and things like that, where there's always accommodations for vehicles, free parking on this day, and oftentimes we ignore the fact that most of our communities within walking distance or certainly within biking distance, have we considered those alternative transportation methods to get people to and from these events. So that's the one thing we want to look at, those special event permits. The second side of this is, why don't we have special events that highlight those alternative modes of transportation? Why not shut down 2nd Street on a Saturday for a bike event, or to highlight that biking community? Certainly other cities have done it with great success. It's brought a lot of business into the community. So that's another thing we'll look at here in this first year of the action plan is, can we create an event focused solely on biking and walking? Excuse me. So I'm on 22. Sorry. Follow along with me. I'll tell you where I'm at. So I wanted to highlight 1.7. This is the education and engagement. And the police are, unfortunately they're not here at the moment, but they helped create this. Okay, this wasn't just, we didn't just copy what Philadelphia did or copy what Pittsburgh did. This came, from this collaboration, from this task force. This is what we did for the past 12 months, is come up with these items. So engage neighborhood groups. 1.7 and 1.8, they're somewhat related, but we're going to have traffic safety officers and our community policing departments engage neighborhood groups about pedestrian and driver safety. There's a lot of misconceptions going on, not just in the city of Harrisburg, but I think in Pennsylvania and in the United States, frankly, about what the laws are. I read some blogs or some comments today on an article that Ms. Vendel wrote, and despite my intuition, I went ahead and read those comments, and they said, we should enforce jaywalking. Well, has anyone ever read the vehicle code and found the definition of jaywalking? It's because there is no definition of jaywalk in the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code. Has everyone read the definition of crosswalk in the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code? A crosswalk is where a sidewalk intersects a street. It doesn't have to be marked, okay? Again, it does not have to be marked. If someone steps out in an intersection, that car has to yield to them, okay? So certainly that education and engagement with the community is definitely important. And then also to our parents and the school children. What more vulnerable? We talked about vulnerable road users. Who's more vulnerable than our children? So that's part of the education and engagement. We're going to get into enforcement, but a lot of what the police came up with when they were tasked with working with this group was not necessarily just cracking down on violators. It's educating and engaging with the community so that we have 100% compliance across the board. That's how we're going to get to zero. So engineering. There's a couple I'd like to highlight on page 24, which is the middle slide there. 2.3. So in the engineering world, we often look at low, medium, and long-term solutions to problems. Low being the most cost-effective, easily implemented. So if you look at 2.3, traffic signal timing, a lot of the traffic signals in the city of Harrisburg are timed for a person walking 4 feet per second. The current laws are 3 feet per second. So what we want to do is change all the traffic signal timings, at least on the high-entry network, to properly accommodate pedestrian walking times. In addition, leading pedestrian intervals where we can. A lot of times you have cars moving concurrently with pedestrians. So a left-hand turn, second to market comes to mind. Left-hand turning vehicles will often conflict with the pedestrians crossing the street. So leading pedestrian intervals will give them a head start, 5 seconds, 3 seconds, 7 seconds, depending on the signal and the conditions. So that pedestrian gets out into the intersection so those turning vehicles see them out there. It's not a race to a spot. They've seen them, recognize that they're there, and then yield to them as it's required and as it's signed. And then transit prioritization and things like that. So some of these will be implemented in year one, particularly on the high-entry network, and you're already seeing some. If you look at right up here at Walnut in front, Chestnut in front, you'll see we've replaced the 8-inch signal heads with 12-inch signal heads with reflective back plates. Those are on the high-entry network. Just it's easy, it's quick, and it lets drivers. You don't want a driver claiming that they couldn't see a traffic signal, and so these are proven safety countermeasures and low cost and easily implemented. So we want to take advantage of those, obviously. 2.6, two-way cycle track and protected intersection on North 7th Street between Boas and Riley. Right, so this is the plan. And this project is in the final design phase. We just went through the 60% plans, and it should go out for bid this summer. This is sort of the epitome of a rebalancing of traffic, of roadway use. So you see on the bottom, you have a cycle track, a two-way cycle track. This is in front of FIA. Federal Courthouse construction is off to this side, my right, your left. And it has a roundabout in there. Roundabouts are proven safety benefits as opposed to signalized intersections. Maybe not so much in terms of crash frequency, but certainly in terms of severity. And that's really what we're concentrated on, right? If you have a handful of side swipes where you just lose some paint on the car, that's certainly better than that one major injury accident that happens. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at that maybe is, again, going back to what the mayor said, perhaps not in line with the traditional approach. When you have a crash modification factors is the way engineers often look at improvements to roads. We may say a 12-foot wide lane is safer because there's less crash frequency. But the reality is it's actually going to increase vehicle speeds. So the safer cartway road lane width is 11 feet because it decreases vehicle speeds. And when there is that accident, that crash, it's less severe. So proven safety benefits, a traffic calming element when you start to get into where pedestrians cross. Here and here, these are raised crosswalks. You have thousands of employees of FIA that cross that word haphazardly every day. When 600 to 800 new vehicles are introduced with the federal courthouse development, that's a recipe for disaster. So we're being proactive in working with our project partners on this, which includes FIA and the federal courthouse, and the developer up on the top corner there, my right, your left. So the other thing about these crosswalks, you see how they turn in the median. So that forces that pedestrian to look at the oncoming traffic, as opposed to a crosswalk that goes straight across the road. So that's very intentional by design, and has proven safety. It's proven safety countermeasure. 2.7 was the last one I wanted to highlight. We've been talking about this one for years. This involves the five-leg intersection, doesn't involve specifically, but includes the five-leg intersection of Berry Hill, Dairy Street, and South 19th Street. Sits right in front of two schools, and we do have some ideas and some concepts for another mini roundabout there. But PennDOT did a corridor study for the entire Dairy Street corridor, which includes other municipalities in there. So we're working with them to make sure, we're working actually with the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization HATS, to make sure that funding is provided for the projects included with that traffic safety study. You can go back one. I almost forgot Mulder Square. Mulder Square, a lot of development going on, three new buildings, and this is another roundabout option that was selected. This is another project that should go to bid probably another 2 months. We're about 90% complete with the drawings. By Friday, the PennDOT highway occupancy permit will be completed. Not completed, but applied for. So there's about a month turnaround with that process. And the MPDS permitting will go to the county. That's ENS controls, erosion, sedimentation, things like that. So this project is moving forward. It's funded, construction funding by an RCAP process, a legislative RCAP. And so we look forward to this. This will certainly help as, again, a traffic calming element, hopefully eliminate some of that wide open dead space that seems to be there, and help with the pedestrian accommodations. You see raised crosswalk on the, what would that be, the south side there. Okay, so enforcement. One we wanted to highlight was the integrate Vision Zero curriculum into police officer training. Certainly that's going to be critical as the police department grows and turns over new members, is just to have officers understand how important it is to educate the public to work with community groups and neighborhood groups, because that's the only way we're going to reach zero, is all hands on deck approach. And finally, executive and equity. The one thing I did want to point out might not be as apparent as when you peruse through this action plan is 1.6, which is create a Vision Zero working group with other members of Pennsylvania local governments, and we've already taken steps in that regard. There have been some phone conversations with City of Pittsburgh officials, City of Philadelphia officials, and those working on behalf of the City of Harrisburg, to start to come up with a collaboration. What's working in Pittsburgh may not work in Harrisburg, but it might, right? When we approach the legislators about perhaps changes, one thing that was mentioned, or at least is referenced in here, is red light enforcement, right? It's proven to work. It's utilized in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and the state is now, they're either using it or very close to using it in construction zones on highway projects. So the benefits are proven. At some point, local governments are going to have that tool in their arsenal to combat these fatalities. And why not Harrisburg? Why not in the state capital, where it can be evaluated by those legislators? So we're going to work with the different municipalities to that end. And that's all I had. I'll turn it back over to the mayor for final comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. And I know that was a lot of information, and there is a lot of information in this action plan. It represents a lot of hard work and a lot of collaboration over many months. So take it and absorb it and recognize that fundamentally what we're talking about here is a fundamentally guiding document for the city of Harrisburg. Every planning decision we're going to make over the next decade, every transportation funding allotment we're going to spend over the next decade, every fundamental comprehensive approach to urban planning is going to be run against this action plan and how it conforms to our Vision Zero commitment to making Harrisburg safer for all of our users and rebalancing what we think has basically been a failed autocentric approach to urban planning. That's why this is significant today, and this is why this conversation is only continuing today and will be a part of every future event and every future decision the city makes. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that haven't gotten quite as much coverage. Wayne mentioned the roundabouts in 7th Street and Mulder Square, all of which are underway as we speak. We have two major projects underway which are embodying this Vision Zero philosophy. One is our State Street Rapid Response. The other is our commitment to 2nd Street two-way. I wanted to bring up a map of State Street because that is the one that is going to happen first. That is what we are committed to implementing this summer. Now, we are in a final stage negotiations with PennDOT and our surrounding municipalities and all of our neighbors to make sure that this plan is successful. And what's interesting about the State Street Rapid Response Plan is it is relatively low cost and it will be reversible in the sense that this is a pilot. We are going to, in real time, test these concepts, measure these concepts, and see what works and what doesn't. And before we invest additional dollars in making the changes permanent, that really embodies every aspect of the Vision Zero strategy. Some of the things that you should expect and prepare yourselves for are among other things, and most fundamentally, a reduction in the number of travel lanes on State Street. Right now, you've got 2 travel lanes in each direction, 2 parking lanes, and a center turn lane, which is equal to 7 lanes of traffic that a pedestrian actually has to cross to get across. Just by reducing the number of travel lanes and pushing the parking lane out into the street, creating a sheltered bike lane, you are creating various passageways for pedestrians to have to take less time to cross the street. In addition to the reduction in lanes, the creation of new and better crosswalks, and the addition of the sheltered bike lane, all of which is about helping create a network. You can basically ride your bike along the Greenbelt and then come down and cut through the center of the city from Civil War Drive straight down State Street onto the bridge over to 7th Street, where you will find your 2-way cycle track, and then through another network of safe streets in Harrisburg, so you can be able to get to and from work safely while riding a bicycle. That is going to be a fundamental change and a sort of watershed moment for Harrisburg, because what it essentially is going to mean is that it's going to take commuters a few extra minutes to get to and from work. And we believe that those few extra minutes will enhance quality of life, help sort of unite a neighborhood that have been cut through by this highway, and fundamentally improve safety. And we're going to measure it, and you're going to see it. And then that will form the basis for a second transformation, which will be occurring on 2nd Street. Now, that is still in the design phase, and we haven't released any full plans for what that's going to look like, although we're looking and moving towards a spring-summer new meeting on State Street where we can release some of the data that we have accumulated up to this point. And we've had a great deal of success in gathering input on that so far. But those two projects together along with our continued conversations with PennDOT especially about Foster Street and how important it is to focus on that, because when you look at the high injury network and the crash data, you'll see that that is by far one of the least safe, one of the least safe areas in the city of Harrisburg. So this is a fundamental philosophical shift. And I can tell you we're engaged in the city of Harrisburg in our 5-year plan for the future of this city, our capital plan. It's also about priority-based budgeting. It's about making sure that the resources that we have over the next 5 years are focused and put in such a way that they make the fundamental impact in improving public safety. And this document's going to help guide that whole process and will come up again and again. So thank you for coming and allowing us to launch it today. We'd be very happy to take any questions you have, and I think all of us can stick around and talk to you afterwards if you want to take some time to absorb it. But any initial feedback, questions, reactions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so Mayor, you just sort of touched on my biggest question, which is looking at these elements, I don't see a lot of mention of the participation of PennDOT. As we know, state roads, we talked about them over and over and over again without, well, State Street we talked about a little bit, but Forster Street, Front Street, the bridge. I mean, these are areas that are so fundamental to traffic and safety problems in Harrisburg,
Sure.
and I don't see a lot of mention of PennDOT in any of this.
So PennDOT has been a partner. They have participated in the task force, and they have been willing to meet with the city continuously to discuss these issues. As recently as a week ago, we were talking about the State Street Rapid Response. They want to make sure that what we're doing will result in safer streets. They want to make sure that what we're doing is embraced by the surrounding community, and but they are willing to work with us, and we are committed to following through on these plans. So we are taking an approach that is, for instance, on the State Street Rapid Response, they sent us a letter asking a lot of questions about every aspect of the plan. Fine. That's no problem. We're answering those questions. We're responding to those questions. We are working with our, our friends in the Tri-County Planning, and we are seeking to have everything lined up so that when we do make these changes, and we are committed to making them, we have the broadest base of support possible. There's no question that we are sort of pushing PennDOT out of their traditional comfort zone. If you look at the 83 widening, there's another example of where the city is committed to looking at alternatives that aren't just about making things bigger and wider and would lead to additional congestion and more cars on our streets. We're actually going to spend some money and commit to presenting PennDOT with alternate plans and designs that we think can save hundreds of millions of dollars for the region. So we're in dialogue with PennDOT. Yes, they're important partners. I think the relationship is strong. At no point have they said, no, you can't do this. They have been saying, do it thoughtfully, go slow, work with us, and that's what we're doing. But it's coming to fruition, and you will start to see some of these major transformative projects soon. Yes?
I have a question on enforcement. It seems like enforcement is a big component here, yet there's been a persistent understaffing in the police department. So can you tell us an updated number of vacancies in the police department and how you will address the needs of this plan to increase enforcement with the fact that the police department is consistently understaffed?
So that is a fair comment and a question, and dealing with issues of recruitment and retention of police officers in the city of Harrisburg is a major issue and a sort of continuing conversation and concern. It's come up as a part of the 5-year plan again, which we are developing to present to our newly formed ICA under the new law, which is allowing Harrisburg to exit from Act 47. We have to put together sort of baseline financial projections as well as a clear plan for how we're going to deal with those issues, and we're doing it. That's going on sort of parallel tracks here with the Vision Zero plan, but if the comment is that we need to deal with issues of police retention to be able to really effectively deal with the enforcement aspects of the plan, I think that's fair and true. We do have a very good traffic unit, and we have wonderful officers that are doing an amazing job reducing crime and working with what they have, but ultimately, long term, we've got to solve our recruitment and retention issues. I have thoughts on how to do that. I don't think it's for this press conference here today. And enforcement is just one component. And I think Wayne mentioned that the police were actually incredibly helpful. They came and they shared their perspectives on things, so we've incorporated all of those into the action plan.
Can you give an update though, like do you know what the staffing is right now, like the current level of vacancies? Has the city made some progress?
We are not making the progress that we would hope to make. I think unless we do some fundamental changes to the police contract, I think it's going to be very hard for us to be able to get up to full capacity. And that is an ongoing consideration and conversation. All right, other questions?
Here.
Yes?
This may have already been asked, Mayor, but what's the cost of this project and who's going to be funding it?
Okay, well, it's not really any one project, it's multiple projects. What this is an overarching philosophy that's guiding the deployment of all of our dollars. So this is guiding how we're using federal and state grants, how we are going after grants in the future, how we're looking to fund various projects, how we're deploying the limited dollars that the city has as we develop a capital plan. So funding for this comes from many different sources, and one of those sources is PennDOT itself, and that's why we're trying to be good partners, and we're trying to push for as much change as we can while also recognizing that they control a lot of resources.
So is it safe to say that this is going to cost in that maybe the tens of millions of dollars?
Easily over time, for sure. I mean, we have that much already planned and allotted for many of these projects, whether it's 7th Street or 2nd Street. But that's not to detract from the fact that there are things that we can do cheaply and relatively inexpensively, and that's part of it. Some of our rapid response can be as simple as closing a lane with planters, or adding new paint or things like that. We can upgrade lighting to some extent, and doing other things that don't require the substantial capital outlay that redesigning a complete street would. So it's going to be a balance of the two, and we're going to try and deploy the limited resources that we have in the ways that have the greatest effect, and recognize that we're an entire network. We've got to address the needs of all of our residents, not just those that live in one particular region.
And you also said there'll be some grants, there'll be PennDOT funds as well,
Sure.
But does any of this include taxpayer funds as well?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's all a question of how do we strategically deploy taxpayer resources in a way that gets the biggest return.
Gotcha.
And we don't want to do anything which isn't data-driven and which doesn't produce results. So if you look at the action plan, you'll see that everything really has sort of measurable goals, measurable outcomes, and allows us to adjust and go back and forth as needed.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if not, thank you for coming, and we'll stick around and answer your questions. Go to the Vision Zero website, which is visionzerohbg.org, and you can find out more information about everything, and we appreciate your time.